Hi there, listener, and welcome to episode 213 of the Ski Podcast. Thanks for joining us. Today is a special episode. I'm delighted to be joined today by Stu Brass. As we'll discover during this episode, Stu was a key player right at the start of British snowboarding in the mid-90s, and he is an ex-British champion, UK Snowboarder of the Year, but he's probably best known for his career after competing. While you might not have seen Stu himself, if you followed skiing or snowboarding in the UK in the last 2 decades, you'll have seen his work. Stu is the co-founder of the Brits, the British Freestyle Championships, and his expertise in running events means that he's worked on the movie Chalet Girl, the Channel 4 series The Jump, and built pretty much every big air, quarterpipe or kicker you'll have seen at any UK ski show. Hi, Stu. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show. How are you today?
I'm great, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. Whereabouts are you?
I'm based down in the Witterings on the beach in Bracklesham. Yeah, I moved over from Brighton, which is obviously where you're at.
I was out on the water this morning, went for a quick paddleboard. It wasn't quite as flat as I was hoping it was going to be. Have you been out in the water recently?
Yeah, I've been getting into wing foiling, actually. That's been my go-to sport when there's no surf.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, a question that I always like to ask my guests when they come on is not when they first last went wing foiling, but when they were last skiing or snowboarding. When was that for you?
I always go on an Easter trip with my daughter and a few friends with their kids to, we went to the Three Valleys, so probably a good friend of ours, Chris Moran, is based out in the Three Valleys. He's an amazing host, and we just have such a fun week. It's just such a good time of year to go away. We happened to have a bit of powder during the week as well, so we had everything. We even went through the ice cave as well that was up in Val Thorens. So that was pretty special.
Seen a video of that ice cave. A regular contributor to the show, Alex Irwin from 150 Days of Winter, put a video together of it. And I mean, I worked 4 seasons in the Three Valleys, and I don't ever remember this ice cave. Is it a new thing?
I don't know. I mean, we just took the opportunity to go and ride through it. It's pretty novelty, isn't it?
It looks great. I'll put a link into the show notes there. And listeners, Stu mentioned Chris Moran there, who I've previously interviewed on the podcast. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. So coming back to, I mentioned you co-founded the Brits. We will come back to that as well. I wanted to start off, though, by discussing this year's event, which took place at Tamworth Snowdome last month, I think it was. How did that go?
It was actually really good. Yeah, we were sort of slightly doubtful as to how it might sort of work. The past, I'm sure we'll go into a bit more, but the sort of past 4 or 5 years have been quite tough with anyone traveling abroad through COVID and then trying to come back from that with, budgets for the resorts as well, which is what we heavily rely on, has been quite difficult. And last year we went to Scotland, which was great fun and really well received and allowed people a bit more accessibility that perhaps wouldn't take the jump of going abroad for a week, whereas they could go for a long weekend to Scotland. And unfortunately, due to the mountain railway not being quite ready for us this season, we couldn't commit to that. Last minute, we found an alternative to use the Tamworth Snowdome, who are absolutely amazing. They have such a good scene. They're celebrating their 30th year this year, and I've been going there for 30 years, back for the days of riding up at Rossendale and going for a cheeky indoor snowdome ride at like 2 a.m. Well, I think it used to be 12 till 2 a.m. they used to allow us on. But yeah, no, it was really well received. We actually had a massive influx of under 12s, which was really encouraging to see, because I think the participation of skiing and snowboarding, the freestyle side and certainly competition side, has been declining for the past sort of few years. Really encouraging to see.
I mean, that is really encouraging that you had so many young skiers and snowboarders taking part. How many competitors were there in total?
We had almost 200, so it's about 150 snowboarders and just over 50 skiers. The beauty of what we did a rail slopestyle competition and a bank slalom, which I think amongst the snowboarders and certainly the older fraternity was really well received. So we had, I think it was around 60 people that were over 40, everyone just racing their mates, and names from gone by, the likes of Tim Warwood and Gendel and Pat Murray, and right back through. It was even Trotter, back down to who was, I can't remember how old he is now. He's 60 something, but he and Doug Foden from Boardwise. We had such an amazing turnout of people. It's great.
That's great. I've interviewed Tim before on the podcast. I'll put a link into that. I know, like last year in Aviemore, Leslie McKenna, who I spoke to earlier this year, also took part in that Masters category. Is that right?
Yeah, she might be in the Masters, but she's totally a contender. She was. I think she's a contender in ski and snowboard when it comes to any sort of bank slalom or racing-esque. She's got that depth and history. And there's actually quite a few people that do have that to do both. And I do both sports. I learned skiing for the jump, actually, to test all the courses as a beginner, basically. Although I did start skiing first. I did start skiing before I snowboarded, but just like 1 week holiday and then very quickly took on snowboarding.
I know you've taken part in some of the Masters competitions before in your own event. Did you do that this year?
No, it was a bit busy, actually. We were slightly understaffed. I should have known by now after 20 odd years of running the event. But yeah, and also we had almost twice as many snowboarders turn up than we were expecting. So it really was a busy day.
And that's brilliant that so many young people came into it. And you mentioned the previous year's event took place in Aviemore. Leslie McKenna was there. Kirsty Muir, I believe, turned up as well. It must have been pretty exciting for everyone who was there when and a current Olympian was taking part.
We've got such a depth of talent, and we have had for the past sort of 15, 20 years, that they're competing on a European international level. The British Championships is, I'm not going to say below them, but they are competing at a higher level. And sometimes, their priorities, you look at Jay Jones, for example, she would always go to the X Games, but she would come along to the Brits. She might not compete, but she would be there. And even she's just in the starting gate, the buzz that some of the younger riders get from having them present. It's the same with Woodsy and even Leslie McKenna, they're just anyone that's around, even Jamie Nichols, he was a 10-year-old when he started riding the AIM series. And I'm sure he has peers that he looked up to. And likewise, when he comes to the event, if he's, in the start gate encouraging kids what to do, then it makes such a difference. And we encourage it. I think quite a lot of the athletes that have started off through the AIM series or through the Brits do realise what impression those people have and look to return that as well.
You've mentioned the AIM series a few times there. We're going to come on to that. But while we're talking about the Brits themselves, I believe we might as well bring this out now. You mentioned Aviemore and Tamworth Snowdome and the limitations, but you've got some big news about next year's Brits.
Yes, following the last British Champs that was in Lax, we've been trying to secure another European resort to take the event to, because obviously we can build much bigger and courses and have a more guaranteed snow cover. And we've finally agreed a deal with Mayrhofen in Austria. Fantastic news. The British Championships was held there in 2000 and 2001. So it's a place that we're going back to, that we've had some history. And they're just super supportive. They've got a great resort there. The Pencombe Park is, they've got, a world-class park for the guys and girls to really, throw down on. So, yeah, pretty exciting.
And so in Mayrhofen then, what time of year will that take place?
It'll be the end of March, start of April. We basically have to look at scheduling it. Traditionally, it's after the World Cups and all the kind of British team competitions that they're obviously now travelling around as a squad and competing in the World Championships. We'll look to follow on from that. It will be announced really quite soon.
Okay, no problem. And one of the benefits of being in somewhere like Mayrhofen, let's say relative to Aviemore, for example, is that you're able to put on all of the different disciplines because of the facilities they've got there.
Correct. So, things like we would love to do a snowboard cross and ski across in Scotland, in Aviemore, for example. But, the snow coverage can be quite difficult. And sometimes where you want to build those courses whilst you're still maintaining some public use of the slopes is quite difficult. And like off the course, if you looked at the bank slalom from last year, if you go off course by 20 meters, there's some rocks sticking up, and if you're racing side by side and someone gets pushed out, that becomes a real hazard, and it's not a safe environment to race side by side. So the difference of being in something like out in the resort, there's way more snow coverage, so we can facilitate 4 people racing down a course side by side. And actually the amount of snow to move around to build slopestyle course in big air is generally far greater. That said, Aviemore did a fantastic job of building some pretty good kickers.
And will you have a pipe there as well?
We're not going to have pipe this year. Whilst it is part of the Park and Pipe programme for the British team, it's not a particularly popular discipline amongst British athletes. And that really stems back from, we don't have any half pipes in the UK. We have a huge amount of indoor slopes and dry slopes. We've got a real strength in slopestyle and rail side of it. You know, you look back to Jamie Nichols, who was undoubtedly at the time, you know, one of the best rail riders in the world, purely from hitting Halifax and the indoor snowdomes on a totally repetitive, you know, basis. So, you know, we are custodians of the Brits, and we look to tune that to what our competitors want, you know. And, you know, when we took on the Brits back in 2002, there was no slope style. It was half pipe, big air, and slalom. Parallel slalom, no, it was parallel slalom. Yeah, slalom. So, you know, when we took it over, we introduced slope style in year one. We'd love to. Yeah, this year we won't have a half pipe.
For sure. Well, you can see with the British athletes who've had tremendous success at Olympics and World Championships, X Games, etc., that it's all been in big air and slopestyle. But that's brilliant news about the Brits coming back to the Alps, if that makes sense. So we'll look out for that in Mayrhofen. I'm sure our listeners would like to find out a little bit more, perhaps, about how you moved from being one of the competitors to being the organizer. It'd also be great to find out about how you ended up working on the movie Chalet Girl and TV program The Jump. I mentioned those before, but let's just track back a little bit. You mentioned Rossendale. Is that where you started as a snowboarder?
Yeah, so Rossendale was 20 minutes from where I lived in Clitheroe, where I grew up in Clitheroe. So I've got two brothers, Russell and Simon, a year younger and 5 years younger, and we used to, well, following a ski holiday, we hired a Lux snowboard because we'd seen someone snowboard and thought that looked amazing. And we tried it on our last day, still riding our ski boots on a snowboard, and got the bug. I was around 17 at the time. I was actually canoeing. I was part of the British team training for the Junior World Championships, and riding dry slope wasn't really very beneficial because of the injuries to fingers and things like that. So I was a bit of a late starter. So once that event had finished, I then joined my brothers, and we were regulars up at Rossendale, and we had such a great scene up there with, you know, Chris Moran, Steve Bailey, Danny Wheeler, Stefan Wormsley. There was just a whole host of like really talented riders.
But I also spotted that you were doing like competitive sort of motorbike riding as well when you were younger.
Yeah, we've done. My dad was a massive motorbike fan, and from the age of sort of 4 and 5, we were all stuck on motorbikes, and we used to do trials riding. On an age level, both my other brothers were British champion. When they turned 9, I got 3rd. So I'm the shittest apparently. That said, we just went motorbiking last week, and I think we're all back on par again, so it's quite good.
Oh, so obviously that competitive side of things and the ability to kind of adapt, I'd say, to different sports. You were snowboarding at Rossendale, but at some point you went out to the Alps and made that transition to being, you know, a pro snowboarder, right?
I love the idea of going traveling. I always was really interested in doing that. And my brother was wanting to go and do a snowboard season. And I was like, great, I'm coming with you too. He took a sabbatical, I took a sabbatical, and we both went away to Les Arcs in 94, 95. Went with Chris Moran and Steve Bailey, and we rented an apartment. I mean, they were, you know, current British champions at the time. So as an opportunity to ride with really talented riders at the time, you know, looking back, it was such a great opportunity because they were hooked into, you know, various photographers and filmers and the sort of scene, and we were on the sidelines, so we got an opportunity to shine, I guess, in that. So, you know, right place, right time. I loved it. I just had such a good fun time during that season that I just wanted to do more of it. I was hungry for travel, and I started to see snowboarding as the vehicle to travel. And I went back to work for my dad in the summer. My brother had enough. He thought, yep, that was great, done that, I'm back to work. And I then got sponsored the next season. Actually, I got a flow deal that first season where Chris and Steve were like, you should, to Burton, you should hook this guy up. I got some free kits. And then the season after, we started to get a bit of funding towards our travel expenses. And I think I was a bit of a manager of them, to be honest, because they were useless with money. I had a little bit of funds behind me, so we were able to fund some of the trips we went on and then sort of get the money back from Burton. And we approached it slightly more professionally, I guess, in that season.
But I guess that's that transition then to becoming, let's say, a professional. You're starting to get some money coming in. You're getting kit from different suppliers. How does it work? You said that there were various photographers working with Chris and Steve. At some point, you get into those photos as well, because there are various images of you. I think there was one in particular, a cliff drop, like in Saint-Foy, that featured in a lot of places.
Yes, that's I guess a classic example. In our first season, we were in Les Arcs shooting with an amazing photographer called Scout. He wanted to do a shoot, and he realised that he could get some shots. He could sell them into not only the French magazines, but he could sell them into the UK market. So I went to Saint-Foy with him, and we did this cliff, for example, that he just thought looked like a really good shot, and I guess I was a bit hungry for making an impression. So I jumped it, and then he realised that I was in last year's kit. So whereas Chris was sponsored and he had next year's kit, so I got changed jacket and board and jumped it again. And then that picture went into Transworld magazine, it went to Onboard magazine, it went into Freestyler, it went to Pleasure. It went everywhere. It was, such a fortunate opportunity there.
Having just dropped it, then being told, "Oh, do you mind changing climbing back up there and doing it again?" Was that like the last thing on your mind, or were you thinking?
No, I loved it. I loved getting some airtime anyway. And if I knew I was going to, if the photographer was, and that's the beauty of it. What you have to understand is that you're working with. If you want to get the good stuff, you got to work with a photographer. And back then, it wasn't always that clear. You got to remember that back in the 90s, snowboarding was so young. There wasn't that. Okay, there were waves before me of riders that were maybe the late 80s, early 90s. But we were the first ones that were starting to take it. There was more magazines coming out. There was more emphasis on getting the right shots, and there was a bit more competitiveness with other riders as well. So it was starting to turn a bit more professional. We were making it up to a degree, a lot of it. Even that, the idea of working with a photographer and saying, I'm going to shoot from here, and I need you to be looking at the camera. You can't do an Indian, have your bum facing me, for example. You need to be turning towards the camera. And some people might take it for granted now. We just shot so much during the first two seasons. I remember my second and third season particularly. We just got so many outfits from Burton to say, look, we need to keep shooting loads of different stuff. And we changed boards a lot as well, because I think I was getting around 40, 50 pages of coverage a year. So
that's fantastic. And I think you were voted UK Snowboarder of the Year around that time as well.
Yeah, don't know how that happened, but yes, it's I was obviously pretty pleased with that.
Well, getting the right shots and being, I guess, in some of the films. But I know that in '98 we've mentioned the Brits. You won the British Halfpipe Championships when they were held in Saas. So you were taking part in that event then, and Halfpipe was like super new back then as well, right?
97, I got the highest air in the Halfpipe, and I won the big air, and then 98 won the Halfpipe in Saas. And also, it was a time when the Olympics was just starting as well. So Halfpipe had just been introduced to Nagano. The sort of chat amongst our snowboard community, the UK, was, are we interested in Olympics? I was like, no, we weren't. I mean, Leslie was. She saw it as an avenue for her, but the other side of it, we didn't do the World Cup circuit. We were happy just getting pictures in magazines because we could make a living and have fun without having to, do as many competitions. The Brits at the British Championships is always a bit of a highlight of the year to go and compete and meet up with loads of friends that have been doing seasons. But I do remember I got measured up for the British team blazer for the Olympics, just in case they selected me last minute to go. But I don't know how that actually happened, because I had no intention of going, even though as a kid, being into so many sports and seeing and loving the Olympics as a snowboarder, I just didn't see its place there, or my place there either.
For sure, but it was very early days, and I think people, depending how long they've been following the there was a skiers versus snowboarders thing there, and whether FIS were trying to take over snowboarding, and that's a whole different debate. But the point is that the Olympics, snowboarding was coming into the Olympics, and I think it was around the time you were doing the various photo shoots that you met Jenny Jones for the first time.
Yeah, so I was on Salomon. I moved to Salomon and Bonfire in the end of 96, start of 97. We basically, between me, Steve and Chris, there wasn't enough budget to look after us, and Salomon came on the scene and we're looking for a new rider. And I was actually already on Bonfire Clothing, and Mark Webster was handling the snowboard side of it as well, because Bonfire got bought by Salomon. I loved boards and saw an opportunity to shine in my own light, and then end up obviously part of being, I guess, a sponsored ride at the time was that you're there to support the brand. So, the brand is sold in the lights of Snow and Rock, and they're doing a catalogue shoot, and rather than using models, Salomon would have preferred to have their own riders, promote the product. So I would go there and, make sure the shots of Bonfire Clothing and Salomon snowboards were befitting of what the brand wanted to put forward. I remember I was in Tignes, and it happened to be where Jenny Jones did her first season in 1999. And I remember just bombing down the slope with her, and she came flying past me. I was like, shit, who is she? It's like, and Mark had seen her during that season at some little, like a big air sort of competition, and she'd done a backflip and thought, yeah, I want her on my shoot. I mean, she was only like 18 at the time, and I was probably 23, 24, something like that, maybe. She didn't know who I was, really. She didn't care or anything like that. But I offered her sponsorship. So I said, look, why don't you get yourself to the British Championships, which was in Lax in 1999. If you can get yourself there, I'll sort your accommodation out, give you a lift pass, got a new snowboard, new clothing for you. And she came. And from then on, I just kind of helped curate a lot of her sponsorship deals for the next, until a couple of months after the Olympics, when she won the bronze, which was the culmination of an amazing career that she had.
Yeah, well, I love that. I love the idea that you bumped into someone doing a season and she ends up becoming a medal winner. But it actually leads us on to the kind of next point in your story, because you've been a professional athlete, but you're starting to get involved as being an agent as well. How did that come about? Were there other athletes that you pulled in, and why did you feel there was a need for someone to help athletes on their path?
I think it was more to do with about me. A lot of my generation were quite late starters at snowboarding. I didn't start really until my first season was 19. These days, if you've not started riding until from the age of 10, you're not even going to be anywhere close to being, a top British athlete. So by the time I was sort of coming to 98, I would have been 24, 25. And I could see that I was doing great from I was getting to travel the world. I got paid to do that. I managed to put some money away, but I was never going to retire from it. And I just looked around at what other opportunities there were, and I'd watched Jerry Maguire, show me the money. And I was like, I could do that. I could be an agent. I could manage snowboarders. Also, you got to remember that back in the mid 90s, sort of that 96, 97, 98, there was a huge interest from the mainstream in snowboarding, because it was really cool. It was really new. It was anti-establishment. It was fun. It kind of, it had some amazing characters in it. We had commercial sponsors. We were sponsored by Budweiser for a while, and G-Shock. And, there was kind of, aside from the core sponsors, we were making it up, but we realized that there were some pitfalls. And my younger brother was getting to the point where he was, unsure about some of the sponsorship deals, and I realized that I could help him, and there was other riders that I could help as well. And that's what sort of got my mind thinking that I could help represent them. And that's how it started. I mean, then I went away, and I know Natives, you started in 99 as well. We both started at the same sort of time. I learned HTML code, and I used a bit of Dreamweaver, and I basically created my own website and started from there. I have no real computer experience beforehand, or even an agent either, to the point where I sorted out a deal with Motorola with 3 athletes. I think they were getting around £8,000 each, and I was taking a commission. And I was telling a friend of mine, and he said, and obviously you get 20% on top from the client. I was like, what do you mean? It's like, well, yeah, you can charge the client 20% as well. I was like, really? And all of a sudden, I went from earning my commission off the riders for 20% to doubling up. So I was getting 40% of the deal. I was like, wow, didn't know that. I guess I was very green in that sense. Those sort of deals were few and far between. But,
When they come in, they're great, and effectively, helping athletes understand their value at a time when it was changing a lot as well. Also, we were seeing like a massive growth and interest in freestyle around that time as well. You talk about the snowboard side of things, but also skiers starting to come through as well, to do with the some of the changes in relation to the skis. Pat Sharples was running his Grom camps. There were quarter pipes starting to appear at some of the shows, and back in those days there were a lot of ski shows. The main ones are sort of London, Birmingham and Manchester. At some point you also got involved in making and creating those. How did that segue from being an agent?
I mean, from being on Salomon, obviously the Salomon 1080 team, so the Pat Sharples and Jim Adlington and Jamie Strachan, that sort of generation of skiers were really fun, and we would ride together. And when it came to things like the ski show always had skiers and snowboarders doing the demonstrations. I was in a position to help because I did do the demos from day one. In fact, in 1990, I think it was 96, we convinced the show that, because it was called the ski show, that they should have some sort of snowboard representation because snowboarding was becoming really popular. So myself, Steve and Chris were given a stand, a 3x3 stand at the ski show to promote snowboarding. And we were there as an information stand. And in order to fund our time in London, we raffled our snowboards with a picture of us riding them. That money that we earned from the raffle paid for our accommodation and time in London. Who has a snowboard information centre at the ski show?
I know.
But then, so obviously from riding the ski show, we then realised that there's more ways that could be represented. Snowboarding could be better represented, or the athletes could be better represented. Make something that's more fun for them to ride and would put on a better show. And unfortunately, the guys listened, and we got more and more involved with that, and they trusted us more as time went on. It just grew and developed, and the show was always interested in expanding and making new ideas to give a different experience for people to come in. And budgets sometimes were great. We had some snow. We did one year, we jumped over a half pipe that people were riding. We had some really fun projects. I mean, Damian Norman at the time was a fantastic driver of doing that with the show. We would then supply the athletes, so we would supply the snowboarders and skiers, and there was no anti-snowboarding skis sort of within that group. It was always within the media at the time. And once we did the British Championships we did the first one in 2003. We did it snowboard only, and then introduced the next year freestyle skiing. We were met at the time with anti-ski. Why are you introducing skiing to the snowboarding champs? It wasn't that well received from the snowboard community, but very soon, disappeared really.
You refer back to like the 1080. Listeners can listen to my chat with Jim Adlington about when he first saw a 1080 ski and how excited he got about it, and how he decided he absolutely had to ski on one of those, and he's just like a plongeur. But you mentioned, I think 2003 was the first Brits, but previously you talked about the AIM series. Did that come before that? What was the AIM series?
Basically around that time, so once I started managing athletes and starting to become a bit of a representative for, I guess, the voice of snowboarders, I was in quite a good position. It just sort of fortunately sort of happened. And so the people that had previously run the British Champs were Mark Adams and Andy Mattle. They'd run it for 3 years and run it really used that hype of that late 90s, the commercial aspect, and brought in quite a bit of money into the event. It didn't really see the riders or the sort of course. It sort of lost its way a little bit. Ultimately, the BSA ended up deciding to try and take control back, and didn't do a very good job. And then realised that they needed someone more professional, another agency, or someone to run it. I met with Spencer Claridge and Ed Lee and a guy called John Bateson, and they started to run the bomb comp at Snowbombing. They were interested in running events, and then we ended up teaming up together to create an idea of a series of events that would give a depth to and a pathway for snowboarders in the UK. So we went back to the sort of drawing board with it. There used to be things like the NPS, the National Point Series on Dry Slope, and there was, obviously lots of individual events, but nothing quite cohesive to bring it all together. So we created the Artificial Indoor Mountain Series. So we had 3 dry slopes, 3 indoor events, and then the mountain was the British Championships. And the idea was that it gave people a bit of a pathway from one to the other. And then to back up that, the industry was obviously keen to promote the sport, to get, generate new people in as well. So we went to schools in each of those areas. So, we'll take Sheffield as an example. We'd go to, so the event will be at Sheffield Dry Slope on the Saturday and Sunday. And on the Thursday, Friday, we would go into a local school, take over a PE lesson. Actually, we'd probably do about 4 shows during the day and just talk to the kids about skiing and snowboarding and what that could mean to them. We'd go and ask them and say, hey, look, right, put your hands up if you're interested in photography or fashion or cooking or travel or, maybe skiing or snowboarding, videography. And, the hands would be just going up left, right and centre. And we're like, you can use snowboarding and skiing as a vehicle to do this. You could get involved with designing apparel or become a photographer or a filmmaker in this industry. And then we'd offer them a free lesson at the event. And the idea is that they would come along and not just to a normal slope. We'd have music going, we'd have the top pros, we'd have a really good vibe. So their first touch would be like, wow, this is a great environment. This is a fun place to be. I kind of want a piece of this. And that's what we're hoping to encourage. And we did. We got so many kids through the doors in that sort of series, to the point where, years later, I would go to an instructor and say, just to let you know, this is going to be the first touch for some of these kids from the local school. We want to make sure you give them a really good experience. And then I remember one girl turned around to me and said, you came to my school and I had my first free lesson from you. I was like, cheeks were tingling. I was like, wow, it's like this person, I've given them, her the first chance to go snowboard, and now she's instructing other kids.
But just back onto AIM, to give us an idea of the scale of it then, how many events were you running through that series, the artificial indoor mountain series?
It varied. The first year went from 4 dry slopes, 2 indoor slopes. We did an event at Castleford before it had really opened, because it was still a building site around. The slope was open, but the rest of it was a building site. That was, we were very fortunate. Year 1, O'Neill were in fact, the brands made a real big difference. You've also got to remember that back in 2000, the brands were investing in snowboarding and skiing. They saw the benefits of it. We had the likes of Trespass, O'Neill, Animal, Quicksilver, that all really invested in and we're happy to sit alongside each other as well, which was more important, because the way the events run, they required a reasonable amount of money to deliver such a big series of events. That went on for a reasonable amount of time. And Orange, actually, at the time, came in 2004, and their investment was massive, and that actually helped us create a second event, which we did a slopestyle British Championships in January, as well as the main British Champs. So we used some of that extra funding to create a new pathway, which was actually a qualifier event for the Quicksilver Pro, which was really well regarded. And back then there was a good circuit of freestyle events that you had to qualify to get into the next level. And the winner of our event got a place at that spot. So it was another of those pathway opportunities that we gave to athletes, aside from the prize money.
Cool. So we've moved to this position then where you're managing different athletes, you're running all of these different events, and I mentioned the ski shows as well. And then when back in the day when we still had ski shows, well, some people might remember them in Battersea Park. There was actually a big air there called Mount Battersea, Builders Mount Battersea, that used real snow. That must have been quite a challenge, creating a real snow jump outdoors in London.
It's more of a challenge doing it indoors. We used to do it at Olympia. That was real. We made real. Well, I say we made real snow. We did make real snow. It was a mixture of nitrogen and water that was done by polar snow, and that obviously the drainage of that indoor is quite a difficult one, and also nitrogen sinks. So we have to clear the basements in all of the big halls to. Obviously, it's really quite dangerous. So actually, indoor was more of a challenge. Outdoor, we ended up using the Hemel Snow Centre. We ended up shipping it in. They were producing more snow, and they were bringing it in literally by the truckload, dumping it. And then we were using a telehandler to distribute it around the slope. So behind the scenes, it was quite a manic sort of, big high-vis sort of setup.
And I guess like other, even for an event that you're doing out of the Alps, keeping a really close eye on the temperatures and hoping that it's not too warm.
Exactly. I mean, I know you sort of touched on it a bit. Or we were going to talk about the end up doing a TV show called The Greatest Snowman. I mean, that was one where we were totally battling the weather. We had to film it prior to Christmas. Did it in late October in order for them to turn around and edit to put the TV show out on Channel 4. But we turned up, there was a green field, it's like, and we had to turn around a snow show before that. But part of our consultancy, if you will, with it was, what if there is no snow? How are we going to create a show about snowmen? Or, basically they had 1 meter square blocks by 2 meters high for 5 contestants, and they would shape them into something in each challenge. So we had 3 challenges, so it was like 15 blocks of this snow, and we actually made it in Holland in a giant refrigerator there, put them into concrete, into these blocks, shipped them out in a refrigerated Arctic lorry. We had 24 of them in the end, to Austria, to the resort, on the basis that we would definitely have guaranteed snow in the resort.
That is one way of guaranteeing it, and that actually leads me quite nicely onto the next area I wanted to talk to you about, because you mentioned that was a program for Channel 4, and you've also transitioned for doing all this stuff within the industry to kind of being the go-to technical experts for film and TV. And I mentioned early on one of my favourite films that my kids love, which is Chalet Girl, which was made in 2011, starring Felicity Jones, who went on to be in Rogue One. What was your involvement in that, and how did that come about?
So we also were part of a snowboard club. We generated Duncan, who had the border.co.uk that started in 97. Huge forum following. I think between the three of us, we covered quite a lot of the online market, I think, between us, didn't we? And the snowboard club we saw as being a way of delivering our promotion and content, and that became really quite a very visual and very a big resource for people online. It wasn't intentional, but that's how people like Chalet Girl came about. They were looking for information about snowboarding and how they could get people to be involved with their film on whatever level. So fortunately we were able to turn around and say, well, hey, look, we also organised the British Championship, we manage athletes, and I ended up proofreading the script for Chalet Girl and removing some of the more wilder terms that were slightly outdated. And then it started to come to fruition, and we brought on board the Roxy partnership. So we introduced them to that, and then they supplied a lot of the team riders to come and obviously participate in what was the competition, but also to stunt double in quite a few things as well. Yeah, we facilitated that side of it, and obviously the courses had to be built as well. The finishing shot, for example, where they come down into the finish area, and you've got the judges, and Christian Stevenson's the MC. We got him involved, and he plays himself. And actually, Spencer Claridge is one of the judges, and Michelle, who was the Roxy marketing woman, she's one of the other judges. There's quite a few sort of cameo, if you will, sort of things. So it was filmed in St Anton, and 3 months later, we filmed the actual action scenes coming down the course in Countertowel. So you see someone do their run, but then 3 months later, they've already filmed their finishing. Coming to the arena. It's all just the way TV works. Yeah, that was fun. Really fun job to
for sure. And is there any truth to the idea that the story is based on Jenny Jones's life?
No, it was based on Tara Dekida's, but when it came out, it was totally relevant to Jenny Jones's story at that time. And I did try and make a bit of a case that they should use Jenny for the piece, because actually Tara wasn't really riding. In fact, she came to ride, and we very nearly had to put a stunt double in for her action, because she wasn't at that level that we were trying to show in the show. So whereas Jenny Jones would have been, she was current X Games gold medalist at the time when we were filming. So it was a good, she would have been perfect. It was her story,
Well, it's a brilliant film. I recommend listening if you haven't watched it yet. A lot of great jokes in it, footage, and now you know exactly where it was filmed. I knew it was in St Anton. I didn't know about Carnatal. I guess a lot of our listeners will know the TV program The Jump, as well. That ran on Channel 4 for 4 seasons between 2014 and 2017. I absolutely loved that. If you've never had the chance to watch it, listener, I don't even know if it's available anymore. But the concept was to get a bunch of celebrities, teach them how to ski, and then set them off in a ski resort to compete against each other, not just in skiing and snowboarding and jumping, but in events like ice skating and luge and other, quite frankly, dangerous activities. And it pulled in not just C-list wannabes, but some real A-list athletes, including Olympic medal winners like Stephen Redgrave, Bradley Wiggins, Rebecca Adlington, Beth Tweddle, Lewis Smith. But sadly, the number of injuries to contestants was probably the main reason the season got cancelled. And we actually mentioned the jump back in the first ever episode of the Ski Podcast in September 2017 when we were discussing it. So how did your involvement in that come about? What were you doing for the jump?
I can't remember how we got in touch with them, or they got in touch with us. Probably through Snowboard Club, I think it might have been. They wanted to call it a jump. It was all about the ski jump. And we were like, you sure? This is like, people that do the ski jump train for a long time to be able to get off a jump and do anything remotely, impressive. And they kind of stuck to their guns with that. But then they wanted to build up around that. Obviously, they need to learn to ski, and they want to do some challenges like slalom. And like I said, they were then doing luge, and they were doing ice skating and a few other sort of challenges. We got involved to do the mountain side of the events, and we would work with shapers like Schneestern that actually create a whole load of amazing structures. In fact, they're the ones that worked on Chalet Girl as well. They're super impressive, like, amazing creations. They do the 9 nights, for example. If you've never seen, if you want to look what can be sculpted out of snow, they even did the Olympics as well. So they make some beautiful things. So we got involved, and it was more a case of meeting expectations from a TV show. So take an example of snowboarding. We'd like to have a snowboarding challenge within the show. And I was like, well, how much training time can you give them? And like probably 4 days. I'm like, okay, well, in 4 days' time, on an average participant, this is what you'll achieve. You're not going to achieve what you think, which is Jenny Jones jumping, a 30-foot kicker. That's not, it's going to look more like a snowboard cross, and they're sort of going down at a much slower pace and not getting much airtime, if anything. And a lot of our dealings were, they would have an idea, and we would try and meet the expectations of how that might look realistically. And also then to come up with our own ideas of things that would then make the show more interesting, and try and stay away from anything that was sort of motor powered. And the same with the cross courses as well. We ski cross as the competitors got better, competitors, celebrities, the athletes, they got better. We start off with the slalom events at the start, and then we even had the airbag jump as a sort of early introduction of the jump before they were ready to go to the main big ski jump, if you will. And it was about curating that and making it look interesting. I think the remit was we need to look like they're going to die, but don't actually kill them. And a lot of the injuries, the series 1 was, like Rebecca Adlington, they filmed every bit of her dislocating her shoulder on the airbag because it was like zoom in, the ambulance, the medical. By the time they'd done 3 or 4 shows, they were like, no, let's keep away from that. But she just popped it in the air. She's done it a million times. And there's a lot of injuries on that show. And I guess with anything, Channel 4 loved the idea that it was the most dangerous show on TV. And they would hype it and expand it. And, Bradley Wiggins left the show because he broke his leg. He didn't break his leg. He had shin splints and he needed a way out. And there's a lot more behind TV than meets the eye.
I was actually lucky enough to come and visit the set and see you. It was out in Kutai, and you very kindly gave us a look around behind the scenes, taking us around in the skidoo to see the different things.
That year, the last year, was fantastic. It was the best. Basically, the show had gone from being live down in Innsbruck to realizing that people were really interested in the mountain side of things. And they then started to do the odd live show from the mountain and realized that was where it was most spectacular and they wanted to be. So over the 4 years, it more and more moved on to the mountain. And because the event was becoming bigger, they gave us a chunk of the mountain off to the side of the main slopes. Where, I mean, there's world-class racing piece there, just literally off to the side. So we cordoned off our own area. We had our own ski-doos. We were just like, we had our own mountain. It was Jump Mountain. It was really cool. And you came and we had arenas set up. We had the ski jump set up. It was fantastic.
It was great fun. How long were you out there for then?
So generally we'd be there from start of January through to the mid-March. Amazing job. I mean, it was such a fun time. Spencer and I would leapfrog, because obviously we've got families and you can't be away for that amount of time. They would come out sometimes, but we'd maybe do 2 weeks on or 2 weeks off. And whenever there was a live show, we'd always be both on set, but during training, only one of us would be on set, on the slopes.
And did you get to know the celebrities much during that time? Are you all staying in the same kind of place?
Yeah, I mean, we weren't staying in the same place, but obviously we are there to observe and manage what they're doing. We set the train up. So I think I alluded to before, I learned to ski because, Warren Smith was their main coach, and he would go and test, say, the ski cross course. And he'd be like, yeah, that's fine. And I'd ski down and I'd be like, oh, that corner's tricky, or that jump caught me out. And then we might tweak things because I was still sort of a beginner at the time. And that was a good way of testing and measuring the courses. I tested quite a few things, even the airbag that we had at the end of the jump. They wanted to show the celebrities that it was safe to hit the end if you need to. So I had to ski down at full speed in a tuck position, and they just hit this airbag at the end, trusting that it would work, it'd be fine, which it obviously was. So we were a bit of a stunt double, if you will, for things early on.
Yeah, I like that.
I loved, as you said at the start, it was a mixture of celebrities and sporting heroes, and the sporting element of it, we really did get some top level, like Sir Steve Redgrave, Bradley Wiggins, fantastic, amazing, achievements, and great to have around. The celebrity side, very different. The athletes they learn, they listen, they're used to being coached, and they take the information in and they apply it. And that's why they got really good, really quick, some of them. Whereas the celebrities are still filming their little stories for their Instagram and just more interested in what the perception is of them rather than, competing, if you will.
I think I remember talking to Graham Bell about this, or it may have been Warren. I've interviewed them both on the podcast before, saying that actually Louis Smith was the fastest learner out there. He just absorbed everything like a sponge and became really good really quickly.
So to the point where he was doing ski jump training at the bottom, and he was watching some of the others doing training on the slalom. And I remember him saying, oh, he was a bit late on that turn. And I'm like, oi, get back to this one. This is the one you're competing on. But he really did have his eye, and you don't get to that top level without having competed. And so Steve Redgrave was in year one, and the show hadn't really found its feet. Was it a competition? Was it serious? Was it like a Superstars type sort of thing? Or was it just a kind of reality fun sort of show? And the athletes obviously took it as being, it's a competition. I'm here to win, and so Steve was quite serious in some content, in some aspects of it. In fact, I remember I had a really embarrassing moment actually, because I introduced myself to everyone, not in year one, it was year two. And we did a slalom course, and I just introduced myself that I was there to build the courses and make sure that they had a good time and that it was safe for them. And I set off out the start gate to ski down the slalom, hit the first gate, and went flying off into the powder and came out and lost my goggles and everything. I remember Mike Tyndall just laughing. He's a safety guy.
Cool. Wow, it was brilliant. Do you think there's any chance that program would ever come back?
No, it was really expensive to run. I think it was around £1 million per episode.
That's such a shame, because it was, brilliant TV. I think, I loved it, and everyone in skiing loved it. Right, I found all of this so interesting. We've covered so much in this chat, and we haven't even touched on some of the other events that you organise, various festivals, and we've covered a lot from what it was like back in the early days of snowboarding, becoming an agent, working on movies and TV, and setting up the Brits. I'd really like to thank you for sharing your time with us today. And in particular, that really good news about Mayrhofen. Where can people find out about that event, when they'll be able to check what dates it's on?
Well, the main website we have is britssnow.com, and that's the same across Facebook and Instagram. It's open for anyone as well. I think that's the important part of understanding something about the Brits. People perceive the British Championships as being a purely elite element, and actually, sure, we do cater for that. We want to highlight the best of the UK talent, but we want to encourage the next generation through. And if we've got a lot of under 12s, then the courses are built accordingly. So a big air will have 3 big air jumps. We'll have a small, medium, and large. And those that are in the under 12 category can compete on whichever level they want against their peers. And they're also competing side by side with, the Olympians as well. And at the same time, we saw a massive influx of families come to the event because of the younger riders becoming, much younger. Back in my day, if you were 14, you were seen as being very young. Now it's, you're 8, sort of 10 years old. So we get a lot of parents competing because they get bullied into it, basically, by the kids for doing things like the cross events and things like that. And in fact, this year at the Tamworth Snowdome, we had a family competition. So it would let us know if there were parents and sibling, parents and child competing. And we would combine their race time and then give another awards. And that created another level of banter. I mean, it was just so much fun. I think we had about 10 different families on each skiing and snowboarding.
I'll put a link to that in the show notes so people can find out about it. And I think it's tremendous, all the different things that you've done in bringing people into the sport. And it's particularly encouraging to hear about young people. And, those events out in the Alps. I've spoken to Mia Brooks on the podcast before, and to her parents kind of off the podcast. And, they took her out to Lax, and they basically lived in Lax so they could compete, or she could compete in the Brits at the time.
They have just the best attitude within snow sports. They, we've seen it all, like certainly from the past 20 years of, as I guess after about 6 years, more kids, younger ones, started getting involved in the competing. And it's a very different attitude to an environment compared to, say, the alpine racing side of things. The parents, there's quite a lot of pushy parents, there's quite a lot of involvement in that side of it. Freestyle has never been that way. It's been a lot more freedom. We have had in the past parents' meetings to remind them that the kids are here to have fun, and their involvement is not always going to be that beneficial. Kind of keeps the balance and tries to keep the right vibe that what the event is. I think that's really important. As there's a lot of sports. I think I heard a thing with Gary Lineker say something about he doesn't really, he goes and watches children play football on the sidelines, but he doesn't really get involved too much with being very vocal, because he said 99% of what you say is not going to be, they're not taking in, so just let them get on with it, let them have fun, and the legwork is done before they get to that sort of competition, if you will.
Oh, well, that is brilliant. Well, the Brits is obviously a place where people can try that out. I'm going to put a link into the show notes. We're just going to move towards the close now. Listener, if you like the podcast, there are 3 things you can do to help. You can subscribe. If you've enjoyed listening to this episode, then every episode will be added to your account and you can never miss one. You can review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, which helps other listeners find us. And if that doesn't suit you, you can just leave me a comment on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube. We're at the Ski Podcast and all of those. And finally, if you do enjoy the podcast, you're very welcome to buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/the Ski Podcast. Technically, I don't drink coffee, but I will trade it in for a tea. Now, there are now 218 episodes of the Ski Podcast to catch up with. Had a little look earlier, and 96 of those were listened to in the last week, including, yet again, one person who listened to our first ever episode, which, as I mentioned before, includes a chat about the jump, something you, listener, now know more about thanks to this particular episode. If you'd like more ski chat to keep you going between seasons, there's so much to listen to in the back catalogue. Just go to theskipodcast.com, search around the tags and categories, and you're bound to find something of interest to you. I also noticed in the last week, 56% of our listeners were in the UK, 12% in the States, and that means the remaining 32% were listening from all across the world, including in the last week Finland, Vietnam, Kenya, and Brazil. So I'd like to thank all of our listeners wherever you are in the world. You can follow me at Skipedia and the podcast at the Ski Podcast. But for now, I'd really like to thank my guest today, Stu Brass. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been great fun.
Brilliant. And finally, listener, thank you for joining us. And until next time, goodbye.